Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. We have an amazing show for everybody. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and joining. My name is Ed Kang, Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com. I'm a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. Glad to be a part of the Startups.com community. We are joined by Q, our team, and Jen as well. And our guest today, we have a very special show. You're going to have a lot of fun, is Rebecca Brown, affectionately referred to as Becca around our parts. You normally go by Becca, don't you?
That's right.
All right. So we're going to do just some back and forth. We're going to chat with Becca for the first half of the show. And then on the back half, if you are in the audience right now, make sure you use that Q&A box, put in your questions. Jen will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, and we're going to make sure that we answer all your questions, and we'll do some fun stuff if we have time. But first, let me introduce Becca Brown. How long has it been since we've been collaborating together? 2 years. Oh, my goodness. Time flies.
Great.
I still haven't made it to Florida to come visit you, but I'll make sure I'll do that in the near future. But give us a little bit of introduction, who you are, where you come from, what you do.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. And yeah, it's been 2 years that I've been leading the community of the CPG, the consumer space within Startups.com. And I've loved every minute of it. It's been really wonderful. My background is as a founder in the consumer space. I started a company called Soulmates, ended up going on Shark Tank for that business. And through that experience of launching and building a company, I started my second business, which is called Core Satellite Partners, which is a boutique advisory and consulting agencies where I work with founders and companies at different stages of growth to help them with growth strategy and business development. I love it. And I started my career at Goldman Sachs. Also got my MBA at Columbia Business School in New York, where I lived for, about 15 years before relocating to Florida in 2020, which is where I am now.
What made you relocate to Florida?
Well, like many during COVID, it was thought to be a temporary thing. We were just tired of being in the city and during lockdown and everything, and wanted to get away into a sunnier place for a few months, and came down here and thought, wow, this is pretty great. Let's stay.
So you had to compare living in New York, living in Florida. I know it's 2 completely different things. I lived in Florida for 3-4 years, and I've been in New York several times. It's like a totally different world, but how would you compare the 2? Curious.
Yeah, they're so different. It's apples and oranges, cliche. I think that for me, like being outside is such a healthy kind of framework, and being able to be outside. And so I think New York, especially just being in the Northeast and having to suffer through winters like you in Canada, it just can wear on you. And I think also just the congestion and sort of, I've always thought, I love New York and I will always go back to visit, but it's sort of this double-edged sword. The energy that you feel that kind of inspires you and makes you get out there every day and crush it is also the energy that can really drain you. So you sort of always have to have those escape zones and places to go and recharge and refresh for you to maintain that level of energy. So Florida is just very different. Because I'm outside more, I think I feel a little more peaceful on a regular basis and less of that sort of like go, go, go. But, it's a trade-off. You certainly do not have the concentration of resources and the diversity of all the industries and things you have represented in New York. So like anything, it comes, with a trade-off.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about Shark Tank for a moment, because it's so rare. I know a few people who've gone on Shark Tank. I've actually helped a few founders get on Shark Tank, which is great. But if a founder is out there and they're listening and they're thinking, oh, I wish I would have gotten on Shark Tank, or I want to try to get on Shark Tank, what advice would you tell them? Like, how do they decide? You got the inside perspective. What would you say?
That's a loaded question. It's a big undertaking. And what I mean by that is there is a long lead time because it's a production, right? It's not something that's just sort of happening live. There's several months lead time to getting to the actual set of pitching the sharks. And then you have the airing process, which has its own set of complexities. So it's a big undertaking. And when you're running a business, especially if you're in the early stages, you're doing everything. You're wearing all the hats. You're doing, sales and marketing and customer service and investor relations and product development. And so if you add one huge additional responsibility like Shark Tank to your plate, you are going to have to take resources from other parts of your business. So my sort of cautionary tale to anybody considering it is just make sure you have the resources that would allow you as the founder or the main person that would go through that process to do that with 100% of your effort, because you need to use 100% of your effort in that type of an opportunity.
But you would agree that there is definitely a lift from being on Shark Tank, and then there's a lift, even if you don't do a deal with the sharks, and I've watched your episode, there is still a lift that happens. There's this bump that occurs. So it's worthwhile if you can take all that pressure and the resource, just like you said.
100%. Absolutely. It is probably the most powerful platform we have in terms of brand awareness and marketing in a concentrated form. And so absolutely, it is awesome. And I am so thrilled that I had the opportunity to do it.
Well, at the same time, I can tell you, I have had multiple instances where I've had to try and get founders and help them work through a really crappy Shark Tank deal. And I think that's something that people just don't understand. Like, it's not called Angel Tank for a reason. Like, it's Shark Tank. The deals can be pretty rough. And I have had to try and advise founders to work their way through, and they've been stuck and their businesses have been just crushed, really, because of a Shark Tank deal. And that's with any investor. But what comment would you give to that, just for the reality of the deals that happen? Because I'm sure you've seen them.
Yeah, it's a great point. And as you said, with any investor opportunity, you have to sort of be eyes wide open with the terms and, is this the right investor for where we are with our business? Is it a strategic? All those things. With Shark Tank and even other sort of pitch oriented platforms, the investment may not actually happen. So that's the greatest risk with something like Shark Tank, where you may actually not do a deal, or you may do a deal and it's not great for you and you may have to try to get out of it somehow. And that is very difficult, especially when you have the framework of a huge media platform like Shark Tank. So I think, like, the takeaway too, if you are actively raising capital, Shark Tank is not the best medium to do that.
All right.
You can't get a deal.
You heard it here first. Use it as one tool of many. That's how I would describe it. So you heard it straight from the shark's mouth. No, is that a proper expression? I don't know. One of those things. You heard it straight from a Shark Tank alumni. All right. So Q has collected some questions that would be great for us to discuss. What do we have first, Q?
Your passion for entrepreneurship and innovation is clear. How do you keep yourself motivated in the fast-paced world of startups? And what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs to stay driven and creative?
How do you stay driven, and how do you do it, Becca? And what advice would you give?
Honestly, I am so inspired by innovation, and especially through Startups.com, where I've been an advisor for the last couple of years. I never get bored talking to founders and hearing their ideas. And will all of them make it? No. I mean, that's the reality of what we do. But I just love creativity and innovation and supporting founders in those stages. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. It is a roller coaster. I mean, it is extremely isolating and at times overwhelming. We talk about the health of founders a lot, at least within startups, because sometimes we put our health last and we know that that will not serve us well in the long run. It's, I think, lonely, especially if you're in the early stages where you don't want to share your idea with many people. One of my best tips for that stage is to create some small circle of trusted advisors that you can share it with, because otherwise it is extremely lonely. And that's one of the things that you will have to manage throughout your career as a founder, is that sort of you're pursuing this, this path that most don't. And for that reason, it can be very lonely and isolating. And if you don't create those support systems early and often, you may not be able to be successful.
It's great advice. One of the things that I share with founders, a telltale sign is, like you talked about innovation, you have to pick a problem that you'd be willing to work on for the next 10, maybe 20 years if you want to go the full cycle. And unfortunately, a lot of founders don't do that. They pick what seems to be convenient, or they pick something that's a flash in the pan. They have a moment of brilliance, but it's not something they want to stay with, because I think you could probably talk a lot about this, but the cost of opportunity, like if you imagine, like, Becca, you're fabulous. I'm sure you're in your early 30s, somewhere in there, and it's great. I am over the hill. I'm on the back nine, right? And my cost of opportunity is huge. If I was 20, I'd be in my parents' basement. I'd have my runway like crunched down, and I would want to work on things. But if it starts to bog down, I'm not passionate about it, I am burning some of the most valuable years of my life. So the cost of opportunity starts to increase. So I can't be picky, especially now. Now, in the beginning, I can try a whole bunch of stuff, but eventually you got to settle into something, because if you're going to dedicate 10 to 20 years, and that's what a lot of the AI engineers are experiencing right now, is they're getting all this experience working for AI companies, and then they're like, I don't really like this, and do I want to spend all my time, even though I'm getting paid $300,000, $500,000 a year, do I really want to do this when I could be doing my own startup? So that's the reason you're starting to see all that happen. So the cost of opportunity and picking, what are your thoughts in terms of, we're not spring chickens anymore, and cost of opportunity?
Yeah, it's critical. we'll never be able to create more time. At least nobody's done it yet. So time is our most valuable asset. And I think we all have to be very realistic with the opportunities that we have in front of us and the time we have. Of course, we don't know how much time we have, but we hope to, have a great long life. I think it's important to be practical, and that goes back to having a good support system, because I think one of our fatal flaws as founders and entrepreneurs is sometimes we can be too optimistic, and our passion can really kind of sort of overwhelm rationality, and we lose sight of things like, well, we need money to live. I need to pay my rent. I need to eat. I have expenses. I have all these obligations. So I think that's where having a good resource group, whether it's places like Startups.com or that circle that you develop for yourself, to be able to go through what are the practical requirements for me to live a life that will be healthy and supportive and pursue my ambition and my passions, but also, come up with a framework that will not lead me down a path that leads to nowhere. And that may be inclusive of having, specific deadlines and milestones that you achieve. Look, if my startup can't pay me within the next 2 years, then I need to get a full-time job. Or on the flip side, I have a great full-time job. I can't quit that job until this side project can generate enough revenues to support me and my expenses and my family, whatever the personal situation is.
That is it. And it changes. Let's do an exercise. This is a great question, kind of sparked an exercise. I'm going to have everybody participate. Q, Jen, and then for those who are in the audience there, you can participate yourself and just do an inventory check. You have to be intrinsically motivated. So there's intrinsic motivation, there's extrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is something within you that drives you. But extrinsic is, I want to be rich, I want to be famous, I want to get in TechCrunch, I want to be the 40 under 40, et cetera, et cetera. And it's been scientifically proven that if you're only motivated by extrinsic things, your mental health, your personal well-being just goes into the dumpster, okay? So there's this theory out there called self-determination theory, and one of my startups was built on this. And it says you need 3 pillars. The first one is you need to feel autonomy, and that's the freedom. And a lot of founders don't want to have a boss. They don't want to be told what to do. They want the freedom to do themselves. And then you have competence, meaning that you're trying to master something. So you need to be challenged and you're working on a hard problem, and that intrinsically motivates you. So you're trying to develop competence and you're mastering the problem, the solution of the problem. And then there's something called psychological relatedness, which is this sense of meaning and purpose. I am less driven by psychological relatedness. A lot of people go, oh, aren't you excited that you're changing the world? Like your product is changing students and families, one student and family at a time. No, for me, my meaning and purpose goes to my family. That's really what I care about. Like, am I a hero to my family, right? And so I realize, and this is just my own theory, that people rank competence, they rank mastery, autonomy, competence, and psychological relatedness in order. And so it works. So for me, the first is I do things because I want the freedom. I don't want to show up. I don't want to be micromanaged. I hate being micromanaged. And I will literally take a pay cut, massive pay cuts, to have freedom onto myself. And then second is competence. I'll do things because can I do it? Can I master it? And the last is psychological relatedness, meaning and purpose. Okay, so let's do that. So Becca, what would you say is for you your 3 if you had to rank them in order? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but we're doing something fun.
I think I'm like you. I will say that the autonomy has become the first spot because I've been on my own for so long. If you had asked me this question, years ago, I probably would have said the second. Number 2, the competency is first, and solving the problems and kind of like working on those problem solutions. And then autonomy might be second, but I agree that for me, the third is sort of, that's not it sort of happens. It's like, if I do 1 and 2, then 3 is able to happen.
Yeah. Now, there are founders out there that completely want to do a startup for competence first. They don't mind having investors. Because I value autonomy, I don't like raising money and having investors. If I never work with VC again, it'll be a day too soon, right? Because I value autonomy. But some people, they're okay with having a board reporting to them. Some people are okay with having a CEO over them, even though they're the founder, right? They just want to solve the problem. And then there are founders that really want to change the world and affect groups of people. They look at certain people and they say, wow, this is all about social justice or championing people who can't champion themselves. Or this is my background, I want to help. Talking to the founder the other day, and she was very successful. She's from Kazakhstan. She's like a local hero because she came here and she exited out of a company for like 8 figures type thing. And now she keeps going back. And when I talked to her about the potential of going back and helping her fellow countrymen. She lit up, right? And of all the ideas, she'd been doing idea validation research, of all the ideas, she lit up with making a difference. Didn't care about the money, didn't care about anything else, right? So everybody's going to be different. I just want to acknowledge that for anybody who's going to be watching this. Q, what would you say is your order?
Autonomy first. The second one would be the influence one. And
Yep.
the third one is competence mastery for me.
Okay, yeah, that tracks. Jen, what about you?
Psychological is my first. For me, it's always been got to have meaning behind what I'm doing and making a difference. And even if it's just my boss's life, that's usually number one. Number two used to be competence, but I believe autonomy is now my second one, and then competence being third.
You see how everybody's
Close.
different.
They're close.
Yeah, and I can definitely agree. You have made a huge difference in my life, meaning and purpose in my life, just supporting. So that's how it works. Okay, let's do another question. What we got, Q?
As someone who has overcome the challenges of entrepreneurship, what key traits should startup founders develop to lead their business through rapid growth and change?
Ooh, Becca.
Well, you have to be willing to pivot. The creativity that brings you to that initial starting point of why you're launching or creating your business or launching your business, you will need that trait throughout running your business because things come up, things that you can't anticipate, things that are not in your business plan. COVID's a great example. So you will need to carry that creativity. And I think what helps to cultivate that creativity is continuously exposing yourself to other situations and opportunities and continuing to network. It never gets easier. You just get a little more kind of fluent in different skill sets and toolkits. And so the more resources you can draw from will enable that creativity. And I also think it's so important to take breaks. We have a tendency to get very intense and to sort of stay in that 100-mile-an-hour lane indefinitely. And it doesn't work that way. Taking breaks, being in nature, I think are great ways to sort of decompress and tap into that creativity. Every time I give myself time to be in nature, I get creative, I get thoughts, I get ideas, things just flow. And it's counterintuitive. Sometimes you think, no, I've got to get this done, or I'm in the zone, I'm just going to stay at my desk. But it's actually the opposite. When you get out of your cell or your cubicle or your desk or whatever, and you get in nature, that's when the real creativity starts flowing, in my opinion.
Okay, if you had to go back and you looked at your success so far, what would you say was the one determining factor that you had as part of your psychological makeup or your entrepreneurial package that you think you could attribute to your success to?
Well, I think I would point to the fact that I've always been an athlete and I've always been goal oriented and been willing to be very disciplined in achieving those goals and in recognizing the work that goes into achieving those goals, but also like being able to step back and say, okay, I didn't achieve this goal, but let me reevaluate and make new goals. So it's sort of that resiliency that you develop as an athlete.
As an athlete, you put yourself through hard stuff. Like you actually have to inflict physical pain on your body, and it takes a mental toll. And the more that you do that, the more that you're used to hardship and discomfort, the more that transfers to other areas of your life. Like I've listened to neuroscientists and people say, it's not about going to the gym and saying, I can't wait to finish and leave here and go eat a cheesecake. It's I signed up and I'm really enjoying beating myself up. And that's the same thing that you need as a founder. Say, I signed up for this. I'm enjoying the painful process, the insecurities that come with it. So that's how I would relate it. Now, I'm not an athlete, but I've heard that's how you would describe it.
It's exactly right. I have a saying that sprints are the key to life. If you force yourself to do sprints, meaning you run down the street as fast as you can, or you're on the stationary bike and you're pedaling as fast as you can, that is a voluntary pain and suffering experience that you're putting yourself through. And when you do that and come out the other side, you create resilience and grit within yourself. And no one can take that away from you because it's a voluntary exercise. It's a lot different if Ed is standing over me on a bicycle telling me to sprint and go, 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 go. I'm not going to feel that same satisfaction when someone else is telling me to do it. I'm telling myself to do it and I'm pushing myself through it and I'm coming out on the other side.
Let's talk about the dark side for just a moment. Becca, I'm curious your opinion, because there's been studies out there that say that the things that you need to succeed massively, like if you look at the top founders, and I know you talk with people who are wealthy beyond measure, successful beyond measure, you're advising them. We talk about this all the time, like family businesses and generational entrepreneurship. There's two collections of data. One is they found that founders or entrepreneurs who are majorly successful, they have a massive insecurity complex. At the same time, they have a superiority complex. They fundamentally believe they can do better, be better than everybody else, but they're also massively insecure. And there's other traits that we would say for everyone, like optimistic, working hard, they got resilience. But you just look at some of these successful people and they are insecure, right? And they got massive egos. On the other side, they've done some psychological research and traits. If you look at the big 5 personality model, Ocean: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeability, and neuroticism, the very traits that make a great entrepreneur and someone who's wealthy as a business person are the exact opposite traits that allow someone to be happy long-term in relationships, right? And so, we have families and, things like that. But I found that there's this clash between those, the way that I used to be when I was in my 20s and I wasn't married, and the way that I'm now. For example, agreeability. If I'm high in agreeability, it's great with my wife. Her and I, we get along, and I go, whatever you want, dear, let's do it your way, etc. But then I get steamrolled in business, and I'm not a good negotiator. When I'm disagreeable and I tell people I'm negotiating, F you, it's my way or the highway, this and that, then that, goes right contrary to what's going to help me in terms of relationship. Same thing with openness. If you want to be innovative, you have to be open to new ideas and to try new things. But they found that actually does not work for long-term marriage, because you kind of have to close yourself off and say, no, that's not my life anymore. I'm not going to be open. I'm only going to be open to my family. So I find this contradiction starts to occur that actually does affect my performance. I don't know, Becca, what do you think? What have you seen?
I think that's right. And it's a very subjective fine line between those two sort of outcomes with that same characteristic. And it's all situational. I think, the Harvard study on adult longevity is the longest study on longevity. It's been going on for almost 100 years. And the key to longevity and health are relationships. Mm-hmm. It's the relationships we have throughout our lives that will be the single greatest determining factor on how long we live and how healthy we are. And I think there's something to be said for that. If we kind of assess all the relationships, personal, professional, and evaluate, are those relationships giving us energy or are they taking energy from us? I think it creates an opportunity to make some changes. Obviously, family is probably one of the hardest areas to, make changes in terms of relationships. We can't change how other people are going to act or operate, but we can change this. And so I love that example, Ed, that you shared, which is if I come into a personal relationship with some expectations that are really kind of geared more to a business relationship, I'm always going to be disappointed. Whereas if I approach that relationship with a different framework and mindset that will lead to a stronger relationship and more satisfaction from my mental state, it's about sort of that positioning and that mindset. So I think first step is to look at those relationships and to assess, do they give me energy? Do they drain me? And if they drain me, what can I do about my mindset that will maybe change that?
Managing relationships key. Okay. But you sparked a personal question. And let me just take a risk here. Okay. And you feel free to just say, Ed, I'm not answering that question. I plead the fifth, but we've had lots of personal conversations before. It's been fun to grow together and get to know you. You've been successful, and we both agree, like we've talked and we've reached a certain pinnacle of success, but it hasn't been like FU levels of success. Like, it's not Elon Musk type thing. How much do you think back, because I do, and think to yourself, man, if I was just a lot harder, or if I was just meaner, or I just pushed this more, and I didn't care so much about all this stuff with relationships and people's feelings, I'd be way more successful. I would have zigged when I zagged. Like, how much do you actually think about this stuff? I'm curious.
I think about it. I don't dwell on it, but I certainly think about it because I think, what I know now, it's just much more than what I knew 20 years ago and who I kind of developed relationships with and who I let into my life, so to speak. And I think understanding it, for me, it goes back to that time equation. Like I only have so much time left on this earth. I only really want to spend that with good people that energize me, that are aligned with my values. And so I've definitely made mistakes in the past when it comes to relationships, but if anything, I don't want to get stuck there thinking and dwelling on them and just think about if I see this again, okay, red flag, I don't want that kind of person.
I go back and I think to myself, I wish I wasn't such a pushover, and I'll be transparent. One of my greatest traits, which helps me work for CEOs and my clients, is that I have a high degree of compliance. And that comes from my Asian upbringing, my culture, where I will be compliant. It's just how I was taught. And so I have no problems when the CEO says, okay, this is the way it's going to go. I go, okay, great. Here's my contribution, et cetera. But because I've been compliant in the past, I have taken on relationships and I've been too compliant with certain relationships that have burned me really hard. And if I had one regret and I look back, I shouldn't have partnered or collaborated or trusted a lot of the people that I did through my founder career. I know you've got experience with this. What are your thoughts on this topic?
When you're talking about business relationships, it's a whole nother league because, and this goes with marriage too, because it's a legal contract. So when you're dealing with legal contracts, it is so important to have the right terms and language in place because ultimately you'll live and die by those legal contracts. So I think, the practical advice when it comes to these types of conversations is you need a really great attorney that's going to help you think through all the different terms and scenarios. And I talk about this topic with my founder clients all the time. It's great when you're first starting out, you're excited and it seems like, the opportunities are endless. But when things get tough, to echo back to one of those earlier questions, you need to have good people with you that will be able to weather the storm. And you need to have a great, legal operating agreement or business agreement or partnership agreement that will enable you to make decisions when things are challenging. So it's not a pleasant area or topic, but attorneys love talking about it.
Yeah. Q, I'm roping you into this conversation. You've had your fair share of ups and downs in business and all the insides of a specific industry, et cetera. What are your thoughts on this whole, I should really have managed my relationships better, or what would you advise from your experience?
Relationships do count for a lot. And I think probably one of my biggest regrets in like business and in relation to my goals and aspirations is sometimes being a little bit too focused on those things. And I think that was why the competency ranked third for me, because ultimately, there's a big saying in the business and startup world, and that's your network is your net worth, right? And there's a reason for that. They always say it's all about who you know. And sometimes it's not all about the competence. It's about being likable. I saw a quote the other day on LinkedIn and it said something to the effect of success at your job is more about being liked than it is being good at your job. And so I think all of these things kind of lend to the fact that people skills are key. They're key in business. They're key to relationships. They're key to quality of life, mental health, because the better your relationships are, the better everything else can and will be. So I think make sure to prioritize those things, and self-development is big for me. That's always a priority, just because everything else kind of flows from that place. And we've seen that time and again. I think it's proven at this point.
To be young and fabulous again. Just a thought for all the founders who'll be watching and who are going to be listening to this, whether right now or recorded. There's a certain point in time where you are required to be incredibly competent, and investors don't mind you if you're a founder that pushes back and you're really intense and convicted. And you're saying my opinion is important. And there's a certain stubbornness that comes with the resiliency to really push forward and follow through on what you think. After a certain period of time, you're expected to build a team. You're expected to expand. And if you're the type of person that can't build a team because now you're just so disagreeable because nobody wants to hang out with you, then you're going to have issues. And I'll bring up a story, and hopefully I don't spill the tea too much. I'm not leaking confidential information, but let's just say I was talking with an investor who wrote a $30 million check to a group of co-founders, and this was in another country. And these co-founders were building something really amazing, and they were now in this other country. And because there was a culture clash and they were educated somewhere else, they didn't understand the entire social harmony and the culture and the nuances of where they were. And she said, nobody likes them. Nobody likes these co-founders. Nobody likes the top managers. So I'm going to go in there and give them the what for. And I said, hey, hang on a sec. And I remember meeting her at Starbucks in this other country. And we talked through, what the plans are. And when you've got those big checks and you need to hire, and eventually investors are going to be looking at you saying, are you the type of person that we can see running a 3,000 person company that makes $100 million a year? That's a major thing. Beck, I'm curious, what do you think about eventually getting to the point where you have to be able to build a team?
Yeah, that's a stage that hopefully a lot of listeners will get to. It's a key turning point. I mean, we're seeing that at the corporate level. We see CEO turnover a lot right now because we've just come through such a difficult last 3-4 year period. And these are big companies we're talking about who are having major turnover at the CEO level. So the CEO is not always, or the founder is not always the best CEO when you're thinking about scaling and growing. Because I think one thing that another fatal flaw as founders is we're so close to our businesses. If we've built the business from the ground up, sometimes it's hard to detach ourselves. And yet if we don't build a team, we will never grow. So there comes a point where you have to step back and bring in people that have different perspectives, different experiences and skill sets. And that's a good thing for your company. But sometimes it can be hard to let go of the reins. And if you're not that person, it's okay. It's actually a great thing.
It's a good point. Good point. All right, Q, what's the next question?
Based on your work with core satellite partners, what simple strategies do you recommend for startups ready to grow but unsure where to begin?
Ooh, well, I'm big on organization. So meaning organize yourself, organize your thoughts. If you're overwhelmed and you're not sure where to start putting it on paper, open a Google Doc, literally start typing, start writing things down, because through that, you'll start to get a framework structure. I'm also a really big fan at the early stages when you're going through ideation or exploration is to start to create a pitch deck, start to put together, what is my market opportunity? How is this different from what's already on the market? What do I think I would need to do in order to get customers? Just go through the processes of building a pitch deck, even if it's only for you to look through. It gives you that structure and discipline. And in my mind, that's sort of the organizational thinking that you will need to adopt if you are going to actually, create a business.
Okay, so write everything down, process, systems, everything like that. Let me break down this question. Let's do a little lightning round. Okay, Becca, because I know you started CPG, but you're advising founders across the board. Like I see in our audience, like, SaaS founders, et cetera. So let's break this down and let's go early stage founders, because you run our CPG community, but you also participate in our community as a whole. And you're going to see, all different shapes and sizes of founders, but especially we have a lot of early stage founders. So if someone is at early stage CPG, let's talk about CPG first, and they've got this idea. Like I just got a pitch deck from one of our founders, and it was just a proposal. Like it was just concept. At concept stage, what would you tell that founder to do?
Research. And so that means obviously Googling for this product or this category, looking at the USPTO website to see if there are patents on this type of product. And again, this is in the space of consumer physical goods, I'm thinking. Understand look on social media. Basically, you're creating your internal database to assess what is the viability of this product that I am thinking about right now. So research is your best friend in that early stage.
Okay, what happens if founder, and I see this all the time, and I know we can agree on this, you research and in your head, it's just the most amazing idea ever. Nobody has ever done this before, and it's all just on paper in front of you. What should they be doing next?
You need to start getting some feedback. So we can become myopic, thinking this is the best idea ever, but it's helpful to get third-party perspective. So I bring back that circle of trusted advisors as a great resource in this stage. You don't want to share your idea with everybody. I get it. But if you have some people that you can go to that are trusted and will give you, mom is not always the best person because mom loves everything kids do. But think about colleagues, classmates, cousins, whoever. Think about who that list of people could be. But you need some third-party perspective here because you can get sometimes a little bit drinking your own Kool-Aid at this stage.
And when do you go to strangers?
It depends on the business. If you have intellectual property that you're trying to apply for, then I would hold off until you have at least a provisional patent, which gives you some time to file for your utility patents. You can use NDAs. A lot of times, if you really had to enforce them, good luck, but it can signal your seriousness on the importance of keeping your privacy for your idea at that stage. But I think it depends. If you're ready to start actually either raising capital or you're going to think about putting up a website and start collecting early customer emails, then you're going to have to bring it out. So it's sort of a subjective time frame, but you can have some of those tools in place to help kind of combat that risk.
That's a good point. I'm not a CPG founder. I've written a few small angel checks. Actually, I could say I'm a CPG connoisseur. I enjoy researching the CPG space. I think we should talk about this in just a moment, but you bring up the whole aspect of patents. Should every CPG founder, if they're not just like buying something and distributing or white labeling something, should every CPG founder do patents?
No, not necessarily, but I think it's an important part of the research process because you certainly don't want to get so far down the path of your product and then you realize there's something else that you're infringing on their intellectual property.
Got it. Okay, so you're going to research, but then after, like, it just seems it's so accessible to do a provisional patent now anyway that dot your I's, cross your T's. It's just a good practice. That's what I'm assuming.
It is a good practice. It's a good practice to know, what you're up against. If there are competitors in the space that have IP, or if it's a real asset to your business. The other piece to that is trademarks. If you've got a great brand name, you want to trademark that early as possible. There is a cost associated with that. It's usually around $300 depending on the class. But that also, one thing I like about the patents and the trademarks is that it gives you some specific actions, and it also attaches a timeline. So if you file a provisional, you have a year to file your utility patent. So guess what? The clock is ticking.
Got
Get
it.
started.
That's good. Okay, so let's jump over then to like software SaaS platform. So how does what you advise and what you're saying translate to the SaaS founder? Are there differences? How would you draw that connection between the two?
Yeah, obviously from concept stage to MVP can be a very long process. And especially if you're not a technical founder, you're going to need to bring on people that can help you to get to that MVP stage. But I think the overarching kind of framework is the same. You need to understand, what is your market opportunity? What are my distinctions? Is there IP? I know it's very hard with software, but is there something that's sort of defensible from a product perspective? And what is my go-to-market strategy? If you are a SaaS company, you need to prove that you can get monthly recurring revenue. And so how are you going to do that? What else is out there? What are the comps in the space where people are paying for that service? So it's kind of the same approach, just slight differences in the execution.
I would agree. What you say about research and CPG, I don't think founders do enough research, not just in the incumbents out in the market space where people are going right now, but then the indirect competition where people go when they realize there isn't a solution or they're frustrated, but then also other startups that are building at the same time. Maybe they're at an earlier funding round than you. Founders just don't give me enough good of an answer when it comes to the research, or they kind of do these competitive analyses where they put it on the slide and then all the dimensions and all the boxes where they got green check marks is perfectly for them. And they don't even acknowledge that other competitors maybe do something just as good or better than them. They just gloss over and say, we're the only ones that do this. We're so smart. And I think that's just so bad. And investors get turned off by it.
Yeah, you do. And you have to think long term. As much as you have to stay focused and think about your deliverables, this month, next month, 6 months, you've also got to think long term. Because think about, this is something that some listeners may not even know what it is, but a fax machine. There used to be a physical device like the size of a big printer, and it had a phone with a cord attached to it, and you would fax documents to people. And so think about all those companies that were developing fax machines thinking this is long-term technology. It went away. Poof, all those businesses went away. So you have to kind of also square your product, whatever industry you're in, with what is sort of the long-term viability of this industry. And if things could change that move against my business, what could I do to pivot to still stay relevant and still stay in business?
Yeah, I'm dating myself. There were fax machines. There was a time when printers, it was like one long roll of paper. They didn't even print on separate 8.5 by 11 letter size sheets. It was one long roll, and it had this like thermal printing on it. It was bad. I had a dot matrix printer, man. I'm dating myself. Okay. But let's talk about, and I want to get to like a cool article we can discuss, because I'm not seeing any questions. Reminder to everybody in the audience, if you have a question for Becca, just put it in the Q&A. Happy to ask it for you, go back and forth. Let's talk about CPG for a moment. And here's what I'm seeing. So I pay attention to where all the investment money is going. And typically, startup investors, VCs, don't like CPG. It's just not scalable enough. It's not like software where there's massive margins in software. When you have a CPG company, you literally are lucky if you can pull a 30% margin on something after all said and done. A lot of times the margins are smaller. Amazon kills you in terms of fulfilled by Amazon. You're just paying out the nose for all the layers of distribution, et cetera. So where software, you can go directly over the internet, and that's the reason investors really love software. As Marc Andreessen says, software is going to eat the world. I think he said that. Someone can fact check me on that. But there are certain categories of CPG that startup investors, VCs, love it. And they say the top 1% to 2% of CPG companies can actually generate VC type returns. We're talking 50x. You go all the way back, probably one of the darlings that did this, Dollar Shave Club. Totally dumb idea, right? And ended up selling for like $1 billion. Nobody thought it'd be a good thing, sending, shaving razors over the mail, D2C. We have a founder that we're working with right now in our fundable accelerator. She was employee number 1 for a D2C grocery brand, built that up to $1.2 billion, right? And so that's a CPG company. What I'm hearing from investors out there is for that top 1% to 2%, and I'd love your opinion on this, is that you need a certain amount of virality. It needs to be social media driven beyond, I'm going to sell, I need to be distributed in Costco, that people will take pictures of it, put it on Instagram, share, I can't believe what this is. There has to be some buzz around it So I'm going to do an experiment right now. Q and Jen, have you ever had a can of liquid death? Do you know what? Oh, let's go back. Do you know what liquid death is?
It's a drink, right?
Yeah. Okay. Did you know that it's just plain water with flames on it and skulls and everything like that? Jen, did you know this?
No,
I've only known this from you talking about it previously, but before that, I've never heard of it.
In Canada, liquid death is not as big. Like Prime, Logan Paul, and KSI's energy drink is just getting big. You know, up here we're starting to see it. But how big is liquid death down there, Becca?
Oh, it's huge.
It's
Huge.
massive, right?
Yeah. And it's water in a can.
It's just so insane. And so that's the reason it took off, because what, you're going to put water in a can and you can put flames and you call it liquid death. The VCs that got in that, they saw that a mile away. They saw their marketing. And I'm seeing other investments start to happen in like these niche products. I was listening to a VC talk about his investment in like sour candies, and it had, I think it was like Final Boss sour candies, and they love the video game aspect and the culture. So we're just talking about something innocuous like candy, but it's receiving literally tens of millions of dollars, eventually hundreds of millions of dollars of funding are going to have to go into this to make this a billion-dollar brand. So these days, CPG can't be just about, I've got a cool product that solves a problem, that serves a pain point, but now needs to have this brand that can go viral and people talk about it. You're on the forefront of CPG. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great examples. The reality is, I don't think that is sustainable for most consumer brands. Yeah, there's always going to be sort of that buzz factor. It's going to pump up revenues and valuations, and maybe there's an exit around that time. But realistically, to be like a longevity-based brand, you've got to have that loyalty and consistency. And sometimes consistency and loyalty don't mean like explosive growth. So I think, a lot of founders obviously go into starting a business because they want to exit. And these are great examples of, founders that have gotten it right. But if it's too viral, I think most investors recognize that that's probably not sustainable. And just keep in mind, like if your brand gets acquired, there still has to be growth that's realized within that acquisition. And maybe it's acquired by private equity, and then maybe that's spun off. So it's not like you ever stop growing. And so there has to be sort of a fundamental way to propel that growth from within the product line.
Let's take it to early stage founder then in CPG. How soon should a CPG founder in the early stages start building a brand? Worry about how awesome their logo is and their social media and all the things that go into branding. How soon?
I think from the start, really, that's the world we live in now. Everything is branding. Social media, liquid death is such a perfect example of that, because branding is 100% of what got that product into people's hands. It was something different. But so I think, and I don't mean from the beginning it's perfect. It's never perfect. You're iterating. Even Coca-Cola makes slight changes to their logo periodically, Google, Apple. So it's more about those starting with something and creating some architecture for your branding, your logo, your style, fonts, colors, things like that, because that gives you that consistency of messaging, and consumers were trained to look for that. And even though we don't always think about it as consumers, when something is off with a product, we feel it, we know it, and it does not attract us to that product.
And that's where it's going to be a little different from, like, say, a SaaS company. I don't recommend getting all twisted out of shape on branding right away. Eventually, you do need to think about it, but functionality is going to be a lot more important. Or design, making sure that ergonomic and founders know if you want them, or users know, if you want them to push this one button, that they can see the button like it stands out. So you want to be making design choices, but it's all about the experience versus, the wow factor of the brand. So that's how I would say it's different. So, all right, Becca, I love picking your brain about what you're seeing out there, mainly because CPG is just so not my thing, but I'm fascinated with it. Q, let's jump into an article and let's talk about something that's going on in the startup world and have a hot take.
Sure. So today we're going to be talking about an article called From Golf to Hunting, a new crop of startup want to make these experiences even better. The pandemic sparked a boom in outdoor sports and recreation, leading to increased participation, and it exposed a lack of innovation in the industry. So startups have seized the opportunity by creating tech solutions for booking and managing outdoor activities. From golf to hunting, venture capital interest is growing, and these startups are bringing modern conveniences to traditionally offline experiences. What do you guys think?
What do you think, Becca?
I think it's so relevant. We all were pent up for a long time during COVID, and we're ready to get out there and have experiences. And I think as this relates to CPG and retail, it's about experiential retail that's really moving the needle right now, meaning we don't want to just go into the store and buy kind of our regular list of things. Like, we're much more excited when we learn about a new product from some experience at an event or in a store. And so it's sort of this like omni-channel, omni-experience connectivity that we're experiencing as consumers. And I think it does come back to experiences. And so I think that the action item here for every brand is to think about how you can leverage experiences or experiential marketing to acquire customers. So even if you don't have a huge budget, you can still do activation events, pop-ups, things to promote awareness for your product and for your brand. If you're a consumer brand, you can think about farmers markets, or if you're a wellness product, think about local club activities like running and bicycling, ways to provide experiences to your audiences and your potential customers. But I think it's a critical part of where we are in marketing.
One thing, when you say experiences, I think about what this article talks about, reducing friction, right? So making it easier to book something, to book an experience. So if something's traditionally offline and you call them and then you actually have to show up somewhere, like, can it be tech enabled to remove the friction? What are some other ways that you're seeing experiences be enhanced when it comes to technology?
I mean, CTV. Earlier this week, I got a demo with CTV, which is connected television. It's any of us that are streaming in our homes, which is like 90% of us at this point. The ads that we're seeing are CTV ads, and we are then getting targeted from those ads. So it's no surprise if I'm gonna watch Emily in Paris and there's an ad for something, and then the next day I get an ad on my phone for that. It's all connected to IP address. So I think that while we might feel that that's a little invasive at times as consumers, and we can set our privacy settings how we want them, that's sort of also reducing friction points, because maybe I did want to buy that, perfume that was in the commercial for that show I was watching. So I think it's sort of, again, a double-edged sword. The technology is making our lives so much easier, but we're also, of course, giving up a lot of our privacy.
Mm-hmm. So if you can attach your product to a platform such as CTV and you can retail it and it's conducive for that, that's another way, like reducing friction in terms of just buying things. We were talking about a startup yesterday where they allowed you to buy things through a messenger, like WhatsApp, right? And so that's removing the friction. Instead of downloading another app or going on another website, just do it through something that you're always doing. So if you're watching TV, why not be able to shop through the TV? That's what you're talking about.
Exactly. And also maybe not shop in that moment because I'm watching the show, but the next day to see that my phone is serving up an ad on Instagram for that product. It's sort of like, whoa, how did they know that? But it's effective.
Yeah, that's so creepy. I'm sure a lot of people talk about it. They just say, well, I was talking like verbally and my phone was there and suddenly I'm getting ads served up. It's just crazy how they're able to do that. But hey, again, it's a trade-off for all these conveniences, like you said. Becca, this has been fantastic. I always enjoy having a chat with you about this and really appreciate it. Appreciate Q, Jen, you making this possible. Becca, I'm going to leave the floor to you. And I'm going to say, hey, what message did you have for our community and the founders who are going to be watching this, and how can they contact you, or like, how do they engage?
Yeah, I'd love to engage. Feel free to reach out if you're on Startups.com, which I encourage you to do so. You can find me on Slack. My Core Satellite Partners is my advisory firm. You can reach out to me there. I think the takeaway is take care of yourself. Honestly, like that's probably, health is the most important thing we all have. So as excited as we are talking about startups and being founders, which is so awesome, at the end of the day, get sleep, eat well, exercise, surround yourself with good people who will support you and give you energy. And that's the most important thing.
Let me give a shout out to the things that Becca does. She runs the CPG community, one of our advisors at Startups.com. And if you're the type of founder and you're ready to have a conversation with someone like Becca, or you're looking for help, you're looking for an advisor beyond what we can offer, because we only can go so much as a community, we're supporting each other. But if you want serious help, contact me, contact Becca. We're going to leave all of Becca's contact information in the description notes of this video if you're watching the recording. Becca, can't thank you enough. Thanks to everybody else who's joined us. We are here every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We got a slate of wonderful guests. This has been Startups.com Live. Thanks again, everyone. Have an amazing day.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everyone.